This is actually the last time that we'll speak this year of the Memches Dvarim, because we won't be here tomorrow night. I don't speak to Mincha Ma'ariv tomorrow night, and there's only 48, so Matzai Shabbos also I don't speak. But anyways, 48. So I want to say something, and I'll tie it in a minute to the last of the 48. So we be Makayim, the Memches Dvarim Shater Nicholas Behem. I'll share in a minute. But I wanted to share something. As I said last week, I spend the greater part of today working on my weekly contribution to the bulletin, and I want to share it. I think it's an important idea. Something. It actually relates to the next to the last one. That's for tonight. Is Mechavan Leshmo. Say sometimes you hear something, and you take it. Oh, it's a nice idea, but then you have to delve into it. When you delve into it, you discover greater depth. As it is, as is true about so much about Torah, but not sometimes we hear something. So I'll tell you what's been bothering me. So first of all, I've been sort of distressed of the fact that, suddenly events and historical events are taking place. What's going on in Eretz Yisrael and throughout the world? Hopefully they'll stifle it. But this sudden hatred we spoke about earlier in the week. Suddenly the hatred of the Arabs, which was always there, seething, but has become so blatant and violent, and it seems to be spreading throughout the world. And I mentioned that, but the thing that's been bothering me, which I'll get to in a second, is that suddenly it's a whole new ball game. We were mourning the loss of the tragic loss of 45 holy neshamas in one of the holiest places in the universe. And we're trying to simply recover from that trauma, and then suddenly another trauma comes. The Gemara says that in Yemaisa Mashiach, in the Gog in the world, in the Mechemes Gog and Magog, there'll be a succession of tragedies that ha'achraynos meshakchos es harishaynos. The later tragedies will cause you to forget the earlier ones. And it's almost what's happened here. Like suddenly we're overwhelmed with all the new news, and what happened? We forgot about all the, we haven't even processed yet. There's so much to process in those deaths and the families. So how do we deal with that? And I mentioned earlier this week that it was ironic that these events that started beginning of this week coincided with the historical date when we came to Har Sinai. They came to Har Sinai. That was the first of the month. That's more or less when this all started. And the Gemara says, why is it called Sinai? Because Shemisham Yarda Sina Li'aylam. Sina Li'aylam. Sina Li'aylam. And it's interesting. So that's a historical fact that we have to remember, that we got the Torah. And remember, for all of us there, we always call it Har Sinai. Remember, Har Sinai. We don't call it other Har Chayrev. It's called other names. But most common, we say Har Sinai. And yet, that emphasizes that they hate us, the hatred that came to the world. Now, the truth is, the Gemara says there are two interpretations. Rashi seems to say that it means sin that came down to the world means that Hashem is angered at the nations of the world for having rejected the Torah. That's the sinner. Why is that so important to us? And the second thing, but others have been, Mechai and others learned that it means no, that they were aroused to sinner because there's an innate jealousy, whether they understand it or not, whether it's the mazel of the Ummah that they react, but not claim to some sense of, not superiority, but privilege, that Hashem chose us, that they can't stand the moral claim to a higher ground, that's what's on. So it bothered me. Why do we talk about the sinner that we cause? Why is that so important to remember? We call it Har Sinai. Why is that so significant? Why does Hashem make it that the nations hate us? So the Beis Halevi, the Netziv, and the Meshech Chacham all say that it's sort of a safety device. That Hashem, realized that when we falter in our fulfillment in being the Am HaNivchar and standing out and representing the Torah in all its beauty, and we start emulating the nations, so Hashem built in a way to remind us, and He turns the nations against us. Beis Halevi talks about this in Mitzrayim. That's what happened, and then the Meshach says that's what happened in Europe. He preceded, it was before, he didn't live through the Holocaust, but he said that'll come a time when people will be so comfortable to say Berlin is like Jerusalem. That's what he said. And people will be comfortable and they forget that we have to be different and distinct, and then the nations will turn against us. And Netziv also says, "Hey, nam levad." Yishkain, on that pasuk, he goes to town on that. So again, it's an important notion to remember. But why do we think about that all the time? Why do we think about that? Why is that? Okay, it's something we should realize, and when it happens, we should know. But we call Har Sinai, and we say Har Sinai, Har Sinai, Sinai. That's the most common phrase we use when we discuss the giving of the Torah, and we talk about Har Sinai. And we have to remember this every day of our lives, every time we say Har Sinai. So what does that mean? So I wanted to say a little chiddush. And I think maybe I don't know. You'll judge, but I'll tell you the thought, whether it's pshat or it's just a truth in itself. I'll let Hashem, judge me for that. But I think the pshat is like this. It says that the sin that came down to the world. Maybe what it means is that when we received the Torah, what we received was something that was so exquisite, such a privilege, so exhilarating, so special. We were elevated off the gravity of this earth. This world is a world that we shouldn't have much to do with. Of course, it's the vehicle by which we carry out the Ratzon of Hashem, and we can elevate it by infusing with Torah. But the general gravity, the forces of gravity that tie us to earthliness and materialism, that's what it means. Misham yarda sin eli'olam. We, at that moment at Har Sinai, we had a distance, a hatred for all that is material, because who wants to be entrenched in that which is finite when a person can bring himself up to the infinite and be part of something that elevates us from the physical forces that most of the world operates under? And maybe that is the actual emphasis. Sin eli'olam. We, with the Torah, realize there's a different approach to the world around us. It's not just a world of opportunity to ingratiate ourselves, but to utilize in promoting the Ratzon of Hashem. And when one realizes that he hates the world as we know it, the world and its temptations to allure, and of course, that claim is really a consequence of that, is when we claim to be removed from this world, and that's our claim, but we don't live up to it, that's when the nations turn against us. And that's what they can't stand, our claim, whether it was Yavon, whether it was Edom, whether it was Bavel, whatever, they couldn't stand that claim. And maybe that's what it stems from. So it's not such a negative thing, it's a positive thing. We have the ability to remove ourselves from this world and the pull that pulls us and weights us down. And I was thinking that, in these tragedies that took place, they really complement each other in a sense of what we're supposed to learn from it. I read such a touching account of a father who lost his son. You probably read it, or maybe you saw it. One of the fathers lost a son in Meron, and he went along with his Rebbe. The Rebbe of the son, this Rabbi Levi, had a son. His name is Moshe, and Moshe went with this Rebbe who was, his name was Rabbi Avigdor, Chiyut, and Chayus, I don't know how to pronounce his name, Chiyut, I think, and he took him, he asked him a favor, come, he said, sure, I'll take you. He took his own son, and he took his friend's son, this Moshe Levi, and his son died, his own son died, and the child that he took, his friend's child also died. And he was distraught, and I had a little interview with both of them. And what came out from it was that the father of the boy who allowed his son to go with the Rebbe, when the Rebbe came to his house to Menachem Avram in a wheelchair because he was also injured, so he couldn't be comforted. He was so distraught. Yeah, I took your son, and I didn't bring him home. I didn't fulfill my mission. I didn't fulfill you entrusted him to me, and I didn't do it. So the father told him, he said, listen, he says, you did me a favor. He thanked him. He thanked the man who took his son to Meron, where his son met his death. And he said, everything's min Hashemayim. Hashem has a plan. My son was destined to die. He could have died in a car accident because his time was up. But because you took him and you agreed to take him, he died after being Makabal Ol Malchus Shemayim, because they said Shema Yisrael, they said Hashem Elokim, and he died in the Mokim Kodesh in the embrace of Rav Shimon Yochai. So the father thanked the Rebbe for being the vehicle to bring his son to a moment where his neshama would depart in the most appropriate place for a neshama to depart this world. So I think, these two tragedies really are not disassociated. The fact that the nations are turning against us, our Gedolim tell us, the Gedolim, it's not me, that it's a time to reflect. Do we feel like we are really the Am HaNivchar? Do we feel that we're elevated off this planet and we live on a different plane and relate to Hashem in a different way, like these people that we saw and observed their lives and see a Teiras Chaim, that even in the face of death, they can experience an inner joy and inner sense of closeness to Hashem, even in the worst tragedy in the world? Only the Am HaNivchar, only someone who has a sinner for all that is physical in this world, personal accomplishment or whatever it is, that we want to ingratiate ourselves, we want to have a successful life out of the venue of fulfilling the Ratzon Hashem. That's not what we want. That's the sin of the Yard Olam. And the way that we get inspired is by looking at people who lived on that higher level, who lived a few tvachim off of this earth, and were able to experience a relationship with Hashem that is able to inspire and give us the wherewithal to deal with the worst of challenges in life. That's the thoughts that I had on what's going on, and I'm sharing them with you because I think there's an important message here. And I want to just conclude. It says the last kinyan is Ha'ima Dava b'Shem Ha'ima maybe Gula L'Olam. And I think why is that a kinyan? If you say something, a Torah, in the name of somebody else, it brings the Gula to the world. It brings the Gula to the world. Why is that? Why is that? And I think, I'm not sure, I didn't see it, I didn't have time to prepare, but again, I've learned this a few times, and I think maybe it means that when you say over something, and it's a good word, you want to say it in your own name, so then you're just using the Torah to promote yourself. But when you hear Torah from someone else, first of all, you realize, we're all in this together. We're one amazing people, which each one of us has. And when I say something in the name of somebody else, that means I appreciate him. Go back to all the things I've spoken about these weeks, about appreciating each other, which is really the aside of Kinyan Torah, and implementing it into bonding in a way that we appreciate each other on that level. So maybe Gula D'Olam, because you're getting closer to the purpose of why we are here. And when you say something from a previous generation, someone else, especially from an early generation, you see yourself as a privilege of something much greater than ourselves, that we each have an opportunity to hear and transmit and give over and be inspired and inspire others, which is why Hashem put us on this planet. He made us the Am HaNivchar to give us a Torah that is so inspiring that it can inflame the world, not with destruction, but with light and or that will bring, hopefully, the world soon to its fruition. So I want to say a beautiful story that I saw, and I wrote this up so you'll be able to read it, but when I posted on Bulletin of Jewish Life, and then in the Bulletin you'll be able to read it, but I read you a story that I happened to come across, B'chasdi Hashem B'siyata D'Shmaya, just today, when I was thinking this through. So the story is told, it's written, it's a journal, someone wrote a book, Ish Lahava, a man, Rav Shimon Benish. He survived the Holocaust. He wrote about his history. And he writes the following. They describe him in the Lodz ghetto in 1943. So you can imagine what a ghetto is. We know, we've read so much. But it was after 43. It wasn't yet, obviously many people had died. Many people were transported. But there was still a significant number of people. And they had different groups. And they still had some level of supply, some level of food, even though the conditions were horrendous. So he decided it was Shavuos, 1943, in the Lodz ghetto. And they decided, a group of them, several hundred people who were part of one specific contingent, and they decided that they were going to have a celebration, to get together, a Shavuos get-together. They somehow managed to get a sack of potatoes and cook the potatoes. They would give out potatoes, and surprisingly, they found some candies, and they were able to give everyone 2 candies. That's what it was. So they're sitting around, and here it is to give some sort of elevate their spirits. They're downtrodden. They didn't know what the next day would bring. They had heard all the reports of what was going on. It was already 1943. And suddenly, they're getting together, trying to be in a positive mood. One fellow jumps up, who happened to be an Einikel of the Radomska, of the Tefer Shlomo, one of the greatest Chassidim of the previous generation, Rebbe of the previous generation, and he said, he took a pasuk, he says, Teven lo nitein lavadecha. Straw you didn't give to your avodim. That's in the story of Mitzrayim, that they were supposed to do the task. So in a play of words, he said, Teven, he turns to Hashem and says, Rabbeinu Shalom, Teven, Tvuna, we don't understand. Lo nitein lavadecha, you didn't give to your servants. Why are we suffering so? And he breaks down and cries in front of the whole Olam. And you can imagine, here it was, they came to uplift their spirits for Shavuos, and it was almost going to turn into a Tisha B'Av. So this man, who this book is written about, his memoir, I guess, he gets up, he jumps up on the platform, and he says the following. He turns to the people and he says, you're asking why we suffer so much. I'll tell you the answer, because it's in the Yontif itself. The Torah was given on Har Sinai, and he quoted the Gemara, Lo Melikra Shema Sinai, Shesham Yarda Sinna Li'olam, Sinna came down to the world. Why is there Sinna? Because we're different. Because we're the Am HaNivchor. Because Ato v'chatonu, Hashem, Ato v'chatonu. So that we wouldn't turn into the beasts that are our oppressors, and that we would be not like them, and we would be so different. When we suffer, we're obligated. This is what he said. We're obligated to sense Ato v'chatonu. That suffering is concomitant with the sense of knowing that Atachatanu. And he said, although this bearing of the challenge comes with a lot of pain, but that pain is a sign that we're still human. The moment we don't sense that pain and we don't sense the frustration, that's the day when we're in trouble. That's the day when we're lost. And they all restored the quiet and their joy, the quiet joy, and obviously the mixed emotions. And they all start singing Ato v'chatonu mikol ha'amim. And that's how they, and they actually go and say, many years later, the people who survived the Lodz ghetto met this Reb Shimon, and he said, this statement that you said, Kasher anu savlim, when we suffer, we're chayav to sense that Ato v'chatonu, that is what kept me going for all these years and beyond. That's what we have to feel. That's, I say it, something that was said in the most difficult of times, certainly appropriate. We have to realize we're Am HaNivchor. It's not happening to us because whatever. Obviously we have to change, but we have to think in the positive because we're special. The day we don't think that, then we're in trouble. We have to realize this, certainly what to shed tears on. People have died in Meron. People are dying and have died in Eretz Yisrael from the young child. And just imagine, we were concerned and we went overwhelmed with our children in school with Corona. I mean, you know what the trauma of millions of children in Eretz Yisrael, what they're enduring, I can't even imagine. When every time they hear a siren, they hear a missile, they don't know. These are children. They went through missiles years ago and constantly, and then they went through Corona, and then they went through the tragedy last week. And they suffered it. There's a lot of trauma going on, a lot of discussion there to show how children deal with it, how to talk to them. And now they're dealing, the entire country, with the fright. We're suffering, and we should feel the suffering. We have to be nice about, but because we're suffering, we know that we're still human, and we're still the Am HaNivchor. Let's regale in that. Let's remember that we can only stifle the hatred of our enemies. Of course, we're indebted to the Tzahal and their efforts. There's no question, Mesiras Nefesh. That in itself is something that we have to stand back in awe. They're going back into Gaza and they're going in ground troops. We know what happened last time. We know the terrible stories, and hopefully no one will suffer this time. But aside from that, we have to realize it's up to us. It's not that we're helpless. We're very capable of helping by becoming and realizing the Am HaNivchor and acting like the Am HaNivchor. The Midas Tavis, Limud HaTorah, doing mitzvahs, and all that comes with it, because Ato v'chatonu. Hopefully that will bring us, and with that we'll come to the Gula Shlema. Hopefully, maybe Gula Olam, being inspired by previous generations who were inspired by others, and hopefully will inspire our children. And hopefully Hashem will do the kindness to us and bring the Gula Shlema. Amen.